Okay.
All right. So while we're waiting for our attendees, as you can see today, we have a special guest joining us, Dan. Dan is bringing,
I
some
think
legal.
I think we're in. Can you hear me now?
Yeah. Yes, we can
Yay.
hear you. Wonderful.
All right, thank you. You can
So,
see my technical ability is somewhat limited, so
hey.
hopefully my legal acumen is a little higher. But my apologies.
Absolutely. We're all in that boat these days. So Dan's going to
Yes,
bring a
for sure.
legal perspective into the show, and I'm going to turn it over to Bruce, who's going to get into our sixth workshop here today.
Fantastic. Lisa, thank you very much. And, thank Universal Software for hosting this webinar series. And welcome to everybody to the last session in our series of webinars. And I'm going to go ahead and shut off our video here so that we can go ahead and start the process and get going. And today, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be focusing on this agenda today. First, we're going to cover a few statistics around why people don't pay. Next, then we're going to share ways to help people from becoming seriously past due. Then Ann Orick, our operations manager, is going to highlight the Collect Plus tools you can use to track past due accounts. And then we're going to conclude with Dan Rabin, who is going to discuss how an attorney handles an account when it is assigned to them and how they can help you recover your equipment and outstanding balances. So let's go ahead and get started. People often feel ashamed of their medical debt. Many view it's a moral obligation to pay their bills and consider it a personal failure when they can't afford to pay them. In fact, the Kaiser Family Foundation reports some people will forego the care they need, including doctor's appointments, tests, and prescriptions. They are probably struggling to pay other bills as well, depleting their long-term savings and damaging their credit, or even declaring bankruptcy. Medical debt is more common than you may think. And according to a 2019 report from the Journal of General Internal Medicine, more than 137 million US adults face financial hardship due to medical bills. And the problem doesn't just affect low-income households or uninsured consumers. Those with substantial incomes and insurance face this as well. In fact, you work with a variety of patients every day, and we just wanted to look at one segment as an example here to just make this point. Individuals covered by employer plans. One of the reasons there's a growth in this problem is the fact that we've seen annual deductibles just skyrocket over the last few years. In fact, the enrollment in high deductible plans over the last 10 years has really kind of flipped the model. Over the last 10 years, 33% of the people had deductibles of $1,000 or more. And now that's completely flipped, as you can see in this chart, as of 2019. It is now 69% of people having deductibles over $1,000. This is just a huge part of the reason why patient pay has become such an important part of your equation for recovering cash in your business. And when you take a look at this with high deductible plans and the fact that nearly 40% of adults in 2018 couldn't even cover an unexpected expense of $400 using cash either on hand or through savings or credit card to pay off that debt in a month's time. It certainly reinforces how important it is to focus on collections up front during the intake process, and certainly when debt is fresh in that first 90-day period. When you look at this chart, it shows that, how much medical debt Americans currently owe. It's pretty striking when you see the largest category indicates that 26% of Americans owe between $1,000 and $5,000 medical debt. And over 41% of Americans owe over $5,000. When people owe that much money, you don't have cash on hand, you are certainly competing with other debt that they have. So this becomes a big concern for us. You can understand why 73% of consumers are concerned about their ability to pay medical bills, and how 50% of consumers are one sickness away from serious financial trouble. Therefore, if you're thinking about asking for the money you're owed, and you're just one of many organizations, you have to really make sure that you're the priority for the patient to pay. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. So collecting from your accounts before they go past due. As we discussed in the earlier session, a collection policy outlining your processes can deliver substantial benefits, including raising patient and staff satisfaction, reducing your staff workload, and increasing staff productivity, certainly decreasing data errors and boosting collections. If you haven't started or reviewed your policy, now is a great time to get ready for 2021. Remember, you can use the template that we provided to start with that process in establishing your collection policies. So as you recall, we started with the patient invoice workflow and broke it into 5 main categories, starting with the workflow with a strong intake process, including consent to contact, and then utilizing insurance processing to capture your payer payments, and implementing the best practices we discussed for your patient invoicing and payment pay process during the first 90 days. Then coordinating a patient-centric communication plan to communicate with those patients effectively. And finally, handling patients who don't pay within that first 90-day period. As you can see, for a healthy AR range, typically you want to be between 15 and 30% of your debt over 90 days, depending on your patient mix. As we know, collections drop exponentially after 90 days, and we want to avoid that. So let's quickly review what you can do at intake to help patients avoid becoming seriously past due. First, what payment information will you collect? Are you storing credit card or bank information for patient balances or reoccurring charges? If you require staff to collect this information, you can quickly improve your collection rates, as we all know. Are you capturing emails, noting if noting if you're getting home or mobile phone numbers, and certainly asking permission to send emails and texts. This will help you contact your patients in the future. Once you've collected the demographic information, you may use a scoring model to determine if you want to extend credit to a patient. If you do extend credit, a critical goal is to determine the patient's responsibility. This is key, and to be able to explain to the patient how much they will owe or how much they anticipate that they will be responsible for. Since pricing transparency is becoming more important to patients, does your policy outline how to discuss the following with the patients and what sources your staff should use? What items will be covered by their insurance? How to explain the patient balance to the prospective patient? And Are you going to require a deposit or down payment? If so, how do you determine the amount that you're going to require? And do your patients acknowledge their outstanding balance? Research shows that if a patient acknowledges the amount that they owe, they feel more obligated to pay it. So do you have them sign a form? And if so, how and where is it stored? Then finally, outline the steps for your patients to follow so they have a clear understanding of their patient pay responsibilities. We also discussed the customer journey map, which provides a framework designed to highlight the customer experience from the time they start looking at your company to help eliminate those pain points for a sale and beyond. When you're collecting your balance from the patient, focus on the communication touch points such as statements, collection calls, and texting. Your message should cover your expectations of getting paid while treating your customers with respect. It's critical that your staff is in sync with the messaging and understands the procedures for executing this policy. This is an outline of best practices used by Collect Plus. Phase 1 and 2 activities focus on accounts that are less than 90 days. And phase 3 and 4 are focused on the accounts that are seriously past due. Most of you are very familiar with this. Even though the wording in your collection calls and letters probably got stronger as the accounts aged, what do you do when a patient has not reached out to you about their balance? The next steps you follow should be outlined in your collection policy. So if patients don't pay, are you going to offer payment plans? What are the reoccurring charge terms going to be? And what you want to take a look at is if you've reached the end of your collection plan, are you going to continue to reach out to them? Your past due account should not just be ignored. You may want to divide overdue accounts into groups with the highest dollar invoices receiving the most attention. Doing so, you can focus on collecting those few invoices that comprise the bulk of your overdue receivables. If options such as payment plans and recurring credit card charges have not worked, here are a few other options. Waiving fees could be considered. If you charge late fees, are you willing to waive those late fees to get them to pay? Certainly consider offering discounts. Ask the patient, if you pay X percentage right now, we will write off the rest. What percentage are you willing to accept? Keep this in mind. It will save you time and money if you don't have to pursue the payment for months or even years. And then settlements. Settlements usually involve writing off a larger portion of the balance. Have clear rules about settlements, choosing a staff member or two who are responsible to approve settlements in the easiest way to come up to an agreement directly with your patients. These individuals should be team leaders or perhaps part of your billing team. They should only be settling when they have to, and typically these are going to be for smaller balances. They should only be settling these things as an as-needed basis. Resist the urge to empower your intake team when discounting these settlements. Those team members should be focusing on collecting the details and getting the patients to pay their portion of costs. So make sure that you've selected the key people that have the responsibility for discounting and have consistent policies in place that they can follow so that it's always being followed the same way, regardless of who's making the decision. If a patient cannot pay, you probably share resources with them that can provide them with outside help. Most states and communities offer help to patients who owe medical expenses. they'll need to do the legwork and apply for the assistance, but you can point them in the right direction. Certainly Medicaid is an example of that, but financial aid through the health system is a common way to go ahead and take a look at this, as well as the area Agency on Aging and specific healthcare associations have specific, programs for maybe specific diseases that are applicable, like diabetes and et cetera. HSAs and FSAs are also something that should be looked at as a way or a means for people to get through this if they're eligible. And in HDMS, these are available for you to look at. And Lisa, I don't know if you have a couple of comments on this.
I do. I just wanted to mention, I thought this was a moment to remind you guys in HDMS specifically how to deal with this, because we get these questions a lot, especially headed into, deductible season. So just a reminder that generally from a software standpoint, what we hear from you guys in the field is one of two things happening. You're either dealing with a patient that has an HSA or like a flex spend account that is going to reimburse you directly as the provider, or you have someone standing in front of you that has a health savings account card that they can kind of swipe like a credit card, or the patient is going to be, they're going to pay you and then they're going to be reimbursed. So just wanted to give you a quick kind of refresh on how you would handle that in HDMS. So if it's the kind where the actual HSA or FSA is going to pay you, you need to load them as a payer option so that your staff, as your customer tells your staffer that they have X, Y, or Z, they can find it as a payer and they can put it on their account demographics sort of as the last payer in the line before a bill would turn over to the patient, because you would be sending invoices or claims to that payer. If you have a customer that's going to walk in and have like one of those flex spend account cards that they can swipe, has a strip or a chip on it, or numbers you can key in, you're just going to treat that just as if you would it was a Visa or any other kind of credit card. So you'll treat that interaction like a private payment, meaning just the same way you'd collect copay and charge their Visa, maybe you are instead charging their FSA card, having them swipe, or like with a payment on account using that method of payment. If you have any questions, if you're running into situations about that, or if that if there's some gray area in out in your store sites, please feel free to chat that into me. I can always kind of work through those scenarios and help you with your table setup. But just wanted to pop in a note there. Also, something that Bruce mentioned a few slides ago, it's something we talked about at length in I think workshop 4, which is about patient communication consent. So Bruce mentioned make sure that whether or not you're collecting a home number or a mobile. As you guys know and have heard to death from me, in our new patient workspace screen, we have all those fields organized right together. So it's phone, mobile, alternate, and email. So they're all on that first interaction, that first demographics page. But I just wanted to also share that I've heard from some of your peers that they've created just an easy account note template. So the topic is patient communication consent, and then they just put a starter sentence or a yes or no question in the account note template to help guide their staffer through, or to have their staffer kind of log the first time they were setting up demographics, when you collected their mobile or their email, did you share with the customer, ask them the question, do I have your permission to, send reminder calls about, resupply or billing to this number. So if you're starting to dabble or look at what kind of consent is involved, that's how a lot of people are handling an HDMS account note template, or even a product master question. All right, Bruce, that's all from me for this section.
Fantastic. Thanks, Lisa. Yeah. Great tips. So when do you write off an account? We recommend you should match the culture of your service and community. Some companies set the write-off date at 90 days and others wait to up to maybe a year before making a final decision. The most important thing is to be consistent and to make sure there is a clear line of communication for your team if and when you decide to refuse service to a patient, etc. You've got to be firm and empower your staff. Your staff should follow the guidelines outlined in your collection policy, but you may empower them by giving them a little flexibility. The decision maker should be responsible to talk to leadership about their choices and then review those choices, maybe setting it up on a formal basis every quarter. Pick a day to send the accounts to collection, to your collections partner, and stick to it. Earlier, we mentioned in our industry, about 50% of all patient balances are still uncollected. That's incredible. Our industry has been notorious for that, and that's obviously one of the things we've strived to improve for you. Our experience is that many providers spend too much time evaluating the individual patient accounts when making the decision to either write off the balance or involve a third party. Having a fair policy to follow can help you save time. You should also focus on decreasing your bad debt write-off. I mean, that's what we focus on for sure over time. Track your AR and that's being written off. And we suggest you look at this at least quarterly. Now, Anne is going to discuss incorporating best practices for tracking those past due balances in Collect Plus and HDMS. Anne?
Hey there, thanks, Bruce. Good morning, everyone. Yes, I wanted to just take you through a couple of the items, best practices of kind of the upfront process that Bruce just described and that have really been covered in this webinar series to date, as well as then talking about some of the decision points that we have already built in the Collect Plus system and HDMS that allow you to, if you aren't able to collect the payment up front, what happens after that? Where are those decision points? Where are the system checks, red flags that let you know, gosh, I should really make a decision on how to proceed with this account. And then finally, I want to talk about some of the write-off procedures that's important to use to keep all of our systems reconciled. So starting with this one, the best practice, again, we talked about this quite a bit, but I want to just highlight a couple of things that we spend a lot of time talking to our provider partners about. The collection policy, obviously, it's important to have an up-to-date policy and to create those procedures that the entire staff is, understands and is incented to follow. Plus we've covered the idea that the systems that you use, like ours are designed to do, help support those procedures. So two of the most important best practices we've covered are, the guaranteed payments, which is what I use to talk about auto pays and recurring payment plans, plus the self-service and automation factor of that, of the whole process. So, those two things together not only prevent collection accounts to the extent possible, but they also keep your costs low and they increase and accelerate your patient payments. So, talking about guaranteed payments, what I'm talking about there is obviously it's very important to capture, the goal is to capture the credit card or bank information up front at the onset of your relationship with the patient and to set up an auto pay. But it's also important to define the rules around those payments and to be consistent with them. And so, for example, when you setting up an auto pay on future balances, do you want to allow the patient to set a maximum monthly amount? So the balance is $200 and you're going to allow them to, indicate 25 or 50 is as much as you can charge each month, or do you allow them to, or do you require them to pay the full open amount each month, open balance each month? That's a decision that you can make and that our system, the Collect Plus system, can can help you with, support that policy. Another example of something to make sure you're thinking about is, what is the minimum payment amount that you want to allow based on the balance due? So do you want $10 payments for a balance of $1,000? Does that make sense? And that changes over time. It could start out with being appropriate, but as the balance grows and becomes past due, then that installment amount no longer makes sense. So how do you check that out and make sure that you're staying consistent? So those are things to discuss with the staff and make sure that your procedures are in line with the policy, and that you're staying refreshed on how to use the system to know where you are on that. The other thing is to make sure you're managing exceptions as efficiently as possible. How are you handling hardships? What happens if you've got expired credit cards and failed credit cards, and that type of thing? So those are just some of the reminders of things we've already talked about in terms of guaranteed payments. And then we've also spent time in this series, particularly the last webinar that we did, talking about self-service and automation. Here we've discussed the importance of having your system reach the patient in a variety of ways for touch points, and the idea that they might prefer one way or the other, and over time, that's going to make sense to them, and will get their behavior set so that they're paying based on that preferential communication style. And so, the other key of that is that whatever that communication is, we want to make that leap from that point to making a payment to be as frictionless as possible. So hopefully over time, even with an older population, they're becoming much more tech savvy than ever. We've had a lot of statistics on that. We want that link from the electronic reminder to the payment to be able to make a payment or to be able to check on a balance. We want it to be as simple, as easy, as few clicks as possible, frictionless as possible. And then once they're there to make a payment, we want it to be as simple as possible. So those are really the keys to the automation and to an effective process. So moving on to the next section here, I just want to highlight what happens. We always, even the best executed policy or procedures will still have collection balances. So what do you do on that, and how do you stay in touch with those new charges that come in when there's also a collection balance? And so for that, the good news is that there are checkpoints in our two systems, in the Universal System and Collect Plus, that allow you to make decisions about how to proceed with that customer. And so I just wanted to highlight a few of those. And we're going to talk about the patient alerts section, the patient detail section in HDMS, and the Collect Plus payment portal. We have a report that I want to highlight, and a couple of other sections within the Collect Plus account detail that allow you to manage an account and know what kind of collection activity is happening on it. So moving on to the next page, Lisa, I'll let you cover this page and the next one. These are notices that exist in HDMS that help you with the process.
Yeah, absolutely. So you guys shared this, such amazing insight in some of these meetings that we've had together. You asked, we heard you, it made so much sense, where you said we have this awesome tool with Collect Plus, we're working in HDMS, how we need some more communication between the two. So the example that one of you talked us through actually was like where a client removed their payment method off of the Collect Plus system, because of course the patient has access to that, and you went ahead with your monthly resupply service because maybe you hadn't checked in a day or two on their account in Collect Plus to notice that. And then you had supply out and you didn't have, that stored method on file. And that example made so much sense to us, helped us really connect the dots as developers. So we created this alert system, which is just like a more, I mean, it's an alert. It's a more urgent account note. It'll pop up in your face for all of your coworkers. It's just going to trigger some more urgent communication versus forcing someone to go look for a note. So what you see on the screenshot here is actually the end result, where if you put in an alert, anytime any one of your coworkers happens into like a plan of service, a walk-in order, a payment on account, into the pharmacy screens, all over HDMS, there's different notes that can pop up based on the action we think they would be taking in the screen. So the Collect Plus system is going to automatically push a note in like you see here. So it created an entry, and we're looking at the alerts system is stored in Patient Workspace and came to HDMS or to you as of HDMS version 3.22. So Patient Workspace came first in HDMS version 3.21, and then one update later, you got alerts added down there on the left. So if you have Patient Workspace, but you don't see that alerts tab, it's available in any of the releases after where you are. But it's going to allow you to make an entry or multiple entry manually. You see there's an add and a delete button. But with Collect Plus, because you're mutual clients, the Collect Plus service is going to also just automatically push in a status change alert anytime there's a status change. So it could be for some other things, but we thought that that example really hit home where the patient took their method of payment away and now you're kind of left without a card to run. So you see that it automatically stamped it in there. It shows you that the note was from the Collect Plus system. And then you see down below the text can be different size, different colors, bold, underlined. It's, it's in our new look and feel. So it has a little more tools. You'll also notice that there's an effective and an expiration date field. So as you need to make manual notes, or if you need to add things to this or make multiple notes, you can put in an expiration date if that's a comment you would only want your coworkers to see for a day or two. These would also be really great for specific like payment arrangements or thresholds that you're trying to get the patient to meet. If you look in the middle of the screen, there's that like lower sub tab where it says general, clinical, new orders, scheduling, collection, deliveries. You can make a different note for each one of those sort of service points, and that's going to control where it pops up in HDMS. So whether you just open plan of service, you're always going to see that general note pushed in by Collect Plus, or if you happen to be in Patient Workspace, you could review all of them. I'd love to kind of give you a live walkthrough of any of that if you guys get into that version and have any questions, but I think it really is that transparency you guys were looking for. I'm so excited the team was able to make that happen.
Very good. Thank you, Lisa. And so, on the next couple of screenshots, I want to make a point before I start talking about them to say, these are scenarios. Again, these are decision points or red flags that are coming up to you as a user. And, it's letting you know that there is a balance already being worked by one of the agencies. And again, when the agency receives that placement, they begin working at day one. They are starting a scrub process. They are looking for deceased and bankruptcies and anything that would be something that would prevent them from working the account, or if they're needing more information to really reach that debtor, they're getting that information, and then they're starting the process right there, either with a letter that goes out, a demand letter, or getting them on a dialer and getting those calls going. So that work has already begun on that balance that is already aged. But these are situations in which we have new balances or an opportunity to continue to work with this, the patient, and then the decision is yours on how to proceed based on what your policy is, what decisions you've made, after analyzing your whole system, how do you want to handle these accounts? So this is an example of where your administrative team would go to the, or I should say your billing staff would go to the admin page and take a payment in the payment portal of Collect Plus. And so this is a new notice that we added last year, a request from a client. They said, why don't you just indicate right there that there's a balance in collection? So here it is in red at the top of the page. So the great part about this is that you get a chance, if you're talking to the patient, you can take that payment on the full balance, and it's extremely efficient to be able to resolve the entire account in one transaction. And so, as you're doing that in the system, the account gets placed on hold, the account, the payment gets posted in HDMS and clears the account, adjusts off the balance. And, that is, again, a very efficient way to completely pay off the balance, and the bill that you would receive at the end of the month provides the fee for the part that was in collections, but then there is no fee for the newer charge. It's just paid. So in any case, an efficient way to handle it, and this is a notice that helps you decide how you want to handle it. And maybe you're on the phone with the patient and you say, what, we really need to, we can't just take the payment on this newer balance. We also require payment on the collection balance as well. Moving on to the next page. This is a report that our users will see in Collect Plus every Monday. And again, the point is we have a brand new invoice, and we want to indicate, and there's a column that says in collections ? About 3/4 of the way over. It lets you know that there's a new balance, but there's also a balance in collections. So again, heads up, this is a point in which you can make a decision. We also have a few other things on this report that are helpful, such as the account is suspended for one reason or the other, or there is a payment method on file, or there's a credit balance. So those are things that give you the full picture of the account and lets you make some decisions about how to proceed. The next page really kind of works in conjunction with that invoices report. You'll see in the lower left-hand corner a section that allows you to merge newer invoices with older balances. And this was a request of a client of ours. A couple of them have had this request for a while. We put it in place. It allows you to say, I don't want to send statements anymore. I don't want to make reminder calls anymore when they haven't already paid the past due balance. So you can take that newest invoice and merge it into the older balance and let it be handled that way without having to continue with the statement process. And then the next page is highlighting just some more information for you about what's going on with the account. There's a new collections tab. This is the account history section in Collect Plus. And there's a collections tab that gives you information about either a status change or a note from the agency about the work that's being done. Again, gives you the full picture of what's happening and helps you with the conversation that you're having with the patient at the time. And so then finally, I just want to touch on the procedure for, or the proper way to send accounts to collections and to write off balances, as well as to post payments on collection accounts. The next page is showing, kind of depicting this process. And, it's important that we use a process and we're all consistent in doing it, because it reconciles the balances that we have in HDMS and Collect Plus and the agency system. And, if it's not done properly, and it is all stemming from the transaction, the way the transaction is posted in HDMS using a correct code. And if it's not done properly, it leads to patient confusion, and it can mean a lot of cleanup time as we're cleaning up those balances in all three systems. So I really encourage you to, if you don't know the process, I won't go into a lot of detail here, but if you don't know the process or the code that you have set up to use for writing off balances in HDMS and posting agency payments in HDMS, please let us know, reach out to your account manager, and we'll walk through it with you. we recently did a 15-minute webinar on the topic, and can even send you the video or the webinar, a recording of that. But the key is, what have you established for your use of the HDMS system in terms of a sent to collections code? And the purpose of that is, when you do the write-off and you want it to zero out on your side and you want to keep that balance moving forward in collections, you use the code, and you need to use that code when you're reversing off the write-off and posting the agency payment as well. So that's really what I wanted to cover in terms of the real specifics that are happening in HDMS and Collect Plus in terms of preventing collections, and also how to identify accounts that have collection balances and those decision points.
Hey, Ann,
so next, yes, go ahead.
before we have Dan pick up, I was wondering if we could pop a question in.
Sure.
Awesome. Okay, so it was when we were looking at slide 24, Tom wrote in a question or chatted in a question. So that was like that first kind of messaging that you showed. That and so he mentioned that message actually shows up in phase 3, and should something on this say like this is a pre-collections notice, because it's kind of causing concern amongst their CSRs.
Okay.
I was just wondering if we could maybe address that. Is it a different message that looks like this?
And actually it is a generic message. This count has a balance in collection. So we do not, we don't discern from the early out to the real true phase 4 collections. We don't indicate that in that message. It's the same one for everything. So I can make a request to make it more clear, to indicate where it is.
Awesome. Tom, I think that takes care of what you were talking about. That way it's not alarming CSRs necessarily, or they're not saying the wrong language to the customer. Cool. Okay, thanks.
That makes sense. It's either, that's showing up, I mean, thinking about it in terms of age, that's showing up when the account is maybe 120 days and older. So whether it's called early out or collections, I'm not sure it has a difference in the way that you treat it. I certainly understand, the idea of kind of labeling it differently to be very precise.
Gotcha. Yep. Perfect. Thanks.
Okay. And so, I want to turn it over to Dan. And, we've been partners with Berman and Rabin for over 15 years. And we're not getting any younger. Dan and his team, they're really experts when it comes to healthcare collections in all phases. We talk very regularly about scenarios that come up with our clients and questions that they have, but they really can handle things from early out customer care to delinquent accounts to collection litigation. They really are the experts, and he's going to cover what happens when the account is turned over to phase 4, our standard service. But he's also going to talk about some other services that our clients have found very beneficial over the years. And if you hear anything that, is outside of our standard service that you're interested in, either as a one-time project or to use on an ongoing basis, just let me know and we can set up a time to discuss it and explore the opportunity. But with that said, I'll hand it over to Dan, and thank you.
All right, very good. Thank you, Ann. Appreciate it, and thank you for the introduction. So, like Ann said, we have had the privilege of working with Ann and Bruce and the team for over 15 years. A little bit more about our firm. We've done collections nationally for many years. Our firm's been around for 35 years, and like you said, Ann, we're not getting any younger. I've been doing it for 32 years, so when we have some people in our office that are younger than the number of years I've been doing it, that scares me just a little bit. So we work on various balance sizes, though. So when you say utilizing attorney, a lot of times people think, oh, that means we're going to file suit. No, we will actually, we'll send collection letters, and we'll talk a little bit more about the type of letters that we would send. And our goal is actually to get people to pay without suit. And again, we work on balances of all sizes. They may be $150 to $1 million. So just varying balances. And so, and based on our history and a little bit more about our firm, I mean, we're fortunate to be A-rated and have been an Investors of America for a number of years. But what I've learned is instead of trying to prescribe something to the client, it's what does the client want? What's their goal? And the simple answer is, well, we want to collect more money and manage our receivables. But beyond that, looking at areas of opportunity. So regardless of the type of portfolio or the size of the balances, there's always opportunities within that portfolio. So it really just takes talking strategy. So the first thing we'll look at is what documents do we have? And so for us, if we're going to be making even a suit decision or just a straight collection decision, we'd like to know what does the contract call for, or if there is even a contract. So if the contract calls for late fees, does it call for attorney's fees? If we were to file suit, does it permit recovery of court costs? So we want to see what that is out of the gate. Now, having done this for a while, sometimes clients don't have that. They have an invoice and that's all we have. And that's fine too. Then you just don't have those other remedies and you can't recover those other costs, but it doesn't make the debt unenforceable. Over the years, I always tell clients in these type of meetings, this is easy to say and hard to do sometimes, but get as much as you can up front. You try to get all the demographic information you can on your customer, get any type of banking, get a social. The social is very important. We'll talk about that a little bit more momentarily. And anything else that may help us. Banking is very important if we're going to look at remedies, but those are very important things. Now, the contract itself may have things that I would look at if we were thinking about a legal strategy. That would include jurisdiction, jurisdiction selection clauses, choice of law clauses, arbitration clauses, and things like that. So we like to take a look at an agreement for a client before even making that decision. Now, on a non-suit client where we don't think suit is appropriate, we'll look at other options such as settlement letter strategies, follow-up letters, and things like that. But if we're looking at a legal strategy, it's good to see what's out there for contracts and invoices and things like that. So moving on to the next page, scrubs. This is not medical scrubs, it's military bankruptcy and the C scrubs. And so when we bring a file in, especially if we have social that permits us to do it, we want to see if the customer has filed bankruptcy. Otherwise, it can be a violation of Section 362 of the Bankruptcy Code, the automatic stay provision. None of us want that. So, and certainly bankruptcy notices are sent. But just sometimes there's a delay in the transmission or there's an address issue, so that prevents any type of issue there. And in addition, if a bankruptcy is filed, we can look at it and decide, well, is it a false positive? Sometimes you can have a bankruptcy that was filed, 10 years ago, and the debt is only 6 months old. So it wouldn't be discharged by that prior bankruptcy. So we want to look at that. And then we also want to look if there's the need to file a proof of claim in that bankruptcy, be it a Chapter 7 or 13 for customers, or if it's a company involved, a Chapter 11 sometimes. The C scrubs, too, are important. Obviously, we want to know if the patient's deceased or the obligor is deceased. And then also take steps to make sure that we perfect an estate claim if there is an estate open. There are estate monitoring services we work with, but that's something also to think about. And then finally, we'll also do a military scrub to see if someone's an active military. We certainly don't want to be trying to collect from someone that is active military. That could really be damaging to your brand and frankly, could violate federal law. So, skip tracing. So, skip tracing is very, very important. And over the years, we've continued to go deeper on our skip tracing approach. A lot of people will use maybe one service, like many of you may have heard of Accurint or LexisNexis. We try to go 5 deep to try to find somebody, starting with an NCOA, and then we use, after that, 4 other services to try to locate somebody. And if we don't locate someone to begin with, we'll run them through a triggers program. So if a new address comes up, we can go ahead and send a letter to them. So, and so just because you can't find someone on day one or the letter comes back with a bad address, that doesn't mean the process is over with. But again, the more information we have at the beginning, the better. So in certain instances, there's a reference to equipment location. This is the scenario where you have rented equipment. In most cases, it's going to be rented or leased equipment. You can't have a sale of equipment that's governed by Article 9 of the Uniform Commercial Code, so actually title passes. That's usually not the case. This is usually a rental situation where the customer has the equipment and we'd like to have it back. What we'll talk about in a little bit is there's going to be some real value in there. One thing I've seen in the last couple of years more than ever is the customers are holding on to very valuable equipment, value of $4,000 or $5,000, $6,000 or more, and the client's not getting it back. So there are certainly some very important remedies for those of you that have that type of equipment can take. When we do make some decisioning too, we look at credit score. And in this case, we don't just look at what we all know to be FICO scores, which is the Fair-Isaac score. We look more at a recovery score, which is a different type of score that most of the major providers provide, such as TransUnion and Experian. And the reason is a recovery score basically says what can you recover in the collection scenario versus a lending decision, which is used for a FICO score. So we focus more on that. There can be quite a difference there, but that's a decision. If you have that, you can also slope your effort. So if we have 50 accounts from a client or 100 accounts, and we have some accounts that have a 750 score and others that have a 490, we want to put more effort into the 750 score files because the liquidation rate will be 2 or 3 times as high on those. Employment is an important consideration because if you file suit, obviously that gives you a better chance of recovery. There are states that have exemptions from execution, such as Texas and South Carolina, Pennsylvania, and a few others. But if someone's working and they have cash flow, certainly it would show their ability to pay. So we can consider that. We also consider assets. I've worked on many cases where people say, oh, someone has no assets. For example, in healthcare, recently a case with someone in Oregon, $40,000 debt, a little more than that. Attorney gets involved and says, well, they have no assets, and we find out that they have a multi-million-dollar net worth, and we settle it. So it's not just the fact that someone's of a certain age or they're retired or not working. We want to look at assets and see what's out there. And the key to skip tracing is really having a very tight, robust waterfall where you run the skips of people that you can't find from step 1 to step 2, step 3, and make it a continuous process. And in most cases, you'll eventually find them. Probably 90% of the files you'll find. And some people just disappear, but yeah, you'll find a lot of people that way. And once you find them, you can turn a skip into a prime. Demand letters, on next slide 34, we will send an initial demand letter. The nice thing is that the open rate on our letters is much higher than the traditional collection agency. We're licensed nationally to collect, and the customers or debtor will often open the letter and call us off the letter. Sometimes they will get online and pay us online, or they'll send payment back, but we get a really good response rate on our letters. We have other follow-up letters we can use too. As I was referencing, we have settlement letters, and we just have kind of what's called surprise and disappointed letter. But we have different letter options too to try to stay in front of that customer. Sometimes they won't answer the phone if they're on a dialer, but they will respond to a letter. So that's very important, just to stay in front of the customer. All of our letters will comply with the Federal Fair Debt Collection Practices Act, and then many states have state-based requirements such as the Rosenthal Act in California. Colorado has certain scripting that's needed there too. So we will make sure we adhere to state law. Compliance is very important to us, and because we know, one, it protects the client, and second, it protects the client's brand. So. Professional debt collectors is kind of a thing of the past. We think of things more in terms of customer care and not rather just straight collections. All of our calls are recorded, and we actually do call calibrations monthly with all of our people to make sure that they are adhering to the requirements that we expect. And, for someone that doesn't, they can have a pay deduct, suspension, et cetera. So we take that very, very seriously. We do get, in response to some letters, we'll get different things back. We'll get a cease and desist on occasion, and we'll comply with that. So on those files, we have to decide if it's a suit-worthy case. We'll get a validation request. So the customer can ask for validation of the debt. That requires that we get supporting documentation and send it to them, reasonable supporting documentation. We don't need, there's sometimes we get requests where a customer is asked to have the articles of incorporation of the client company. That's not validation of the debt. That's just nonsense. So we try to make sure that it's a reasonable request. Also, in response to our letters, we're getting a lot of requests from debt settlement companies today. They're on the rise, which is a great thing. We have a good rapport with them, and a lot of times we can turn those people into payers. So next slide on non-judicial repossession. This is in cases where there is equipment and you have a right to it, and hopefully you have the patient's consent to retrieve the equipment upon default, and that they'll return it voluntarily, which is really the best case scenario. You can't just obviously break into someone's house and take it. Unlike a car, where if it's in the driveway, a repo person can take it. You can't do that with equipment. So you really need the customer consent to do that. So that takes us to the next slide, which is judicial actions. We can use judicial actions for various things, just general collection lawsuits, or in cases where there's equipment, we can also seek recovery, which is a replevin of the actual equipment. So there are certain factors that we look at if we're going to make decisions on suits. And I'm a big fan of really undersuing rather than oversuing. I think there are some attorneys in collections that try to oversue files. Well, that takes a lot of time and a lot of cost to the client. So we have to be able to show that there's going to be a return on that to the client. And so we'll look at the balance of the account, we'll look at the score that we have on the recovery score, what state is it in. For example, Texas is a challenging state to sue in because of the post-judgment exemptions. Is there a dispute? Post-judgment remedies. And so we'll look at all those things before making a recommendation. But when you have account balances, especially those that are over $4,000, $5,000, $6,000, it really is something that should be looked at and considered as well. Venue is a fancy legal word, as maybe many of you know, is for basically a county, a jurisdiction in the state court sense. So if you're in Johnson County, Kansas, that's the court where venue would properly lie. In order to file a suit, you do have to have acceptable documentation. Most courts follow what's called notice pleading, which means you could really just make a short and plain statement of a claim saying that John Doe owes us $5,600 for this account. And that would actually do it in most courts. But to get a judgment, most judges will want to see a supporting affidavit and a document to support the claim, so he or she can have a reason to give you a judgment and show it's a liquidated balance. But it's pretty easy to do. And the suit process is really fairly simple in these cases. Many times they'll go through a magistrate or a court that moves quickly, and so those cases can move to judgment. And that goes back to some of the earlier comment, is that we really want to see what we have up front. I mean, if we have a bank account or we have a place of employment, and then we know, well, we have something to garnish. We can garnish a bank account, and we can garnish a place of employment in states where that's permitted. We can transcribe a lien onto property. And that's why it's very important that we get as much information as we can at the beginning so we can make a prudent decision and a good recommendation for suits down the road. So that's kind of it. I see I'm about out of time, so I'm sorry I rushed through that last piece, but it kind of gives you a high level. Feel free to reach out to me with any thoughts or questions of any kind. My email and direct line are on there, and happy to answer any questions.
Dan, that was great. Thank you.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for hosting. And I didn't know, did you see any other questions that we can answer with the time that's remaining?
Nope, looks good. So many new pieces of information I have never seen or heard before. So I'm so excited Dan could join us. I think that was a great way to sort of wrap up this workshop. Everyone definitely knows how to get a hold of us. So if they think of anything else, they will. But yeah, the chat looks quiet.
Very good. Well, thank you for everybody attending today. And again, thank Lisa and Universal Software Solutions for hosting this. And we appreciate everyone's business. And if you do have questions or aren't doing business with us, please reach out to myself or Ann. We'd be happy to talk to you about our solution and make any recommendations we can to help you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Allegiance Group. Amazing content. Love your product. Love working with you guys. Good to see all of you. Thanks, everyone.
All right, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Have a good rest of your day. Thank you then. Thank you all. Bye-bye.